Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yes, it's our weekly voyage of discovery in the world of books, books I've read and authors I've interviewed. Find us each and every week. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, be it Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever. And I have reviews many times on viewsonbooks.com. Now, this week we are joined by a wonderful, wonderful true crime writer. His name is Dean Jobb. Now, Dean is not a blood, guts, and gore guy. He explores some great con men. Yeah, cons and things around serial killers that aren't bloody. I got to tell you, this guy is a great, great author, a great writer. He's with us. We talk about his first major book, which was called The Empire of Deception. How good is this book? Friends, if you have not read it, go out, find it, read it, buy it, whatever. Consider one of the top 50 biographies of all time. Of all time. Yeah, it's about a guy named Leo Koretz. Never heard of Leo. Dean Jobb introduces us to Leo Koretz in that book and in his interview today. And then he switches to the murderous Dr. Cream over in London and Canada and America, a serial killer who was so famous or infamous, maybe, he ends up in Madame Tussauds Wax Museum for 70 years. Can you believe this? This is amazing. And he doesn't focus on the blood and the gore, friends, okay? And he likes the story behind the whole thing, the search for him, what he's doing, everything else. And then he introduces us to his newest book. That's right, A Gentleman and a Thief. This is about a jewel thief back in the 1920s. I'm telling you, this man has found wonderful stories, writes a beautiful book, easy to read, wonderful narratives of the whole thing. You can't go wrong with the Dean Jobb. And so without any further ado, let's go right into that interview with Dean Jobb. Dean, welcome to Books and Looks.
Hi, Blaine. Thanks for inviting me on.
Well, very happy to have you, and you're coming to us from the Atlantic time zone. Where in the Atlantic time zone are you?
I'm in Nova Scotia, Canada. It's a little town called Wolfville.
Okay. Wow. Is it? Okay. Now, I don't know too much about my geography. Is it near Halifax at all?
About an hour outside Halifax.
An hour outside. Okay. Yeah. One of my favorite restaurants, I will admit, is a place called the Sou'Wester. Have you ever heard of the Sou'Wester up there in...
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
At Peggy's Cove, I think.
Yes. We took a cruise. We loved the Sou'Wester. My wife almost didn't make it back on the bus, but for that tour and wonderful fish cakes. I love the fish cakes up there. So, oh, yeah. It's lovely up there. Nice place. Well, now, Dean, you are one of the top, and I do mean this, top nonfiction true crime writers out there. But what's lovely is you don't specialize in gore on the whole, okay? You have fascinating people. So I'd tell you a little bit about your background. Where'd you go to college? What got you into this whole thing? And did you specialize in any art, journalism or literature classes while you were there?
I'm a former journalist, and I started in my mid-20s. I started working for newspapers here in Nova Scotia, daily newspapers, and very soon found myself on the court beat. So I had to learn a lot of law really quickly. I did have a history degree from university. I hadn't gone to journalism school. It was still an era when you could walk into a newsroom and get a job without one. But as I was covering courts and hearing about precedents in old cases, some of them local Nova Scotia cases, I started to put my two interests together, my new interest in law and my old interest in history. And I started writing historical true crime, resurrecting old murders, bizarre bank robberies, villains and pirates and things like this, and started doing features on these. And that's what really morphed into my interest in true crime. So this is over 35 years ago. So I wasn't, it wasn't the thing it is now. I mean, true crime's always been a thing, but what I loved about it was how a true crime story had such inherent drama, so much at stake. There might be a manhunt, there'd be a trial, there'd be a search for the truth, and all of that drama. But underneath that was just such a great window on the past, what people did, how they thought, even the law itself reflecting how people perceived crime and punishment. So that really spurred me to dig deeper into history and to get that context into my work and into my books.
Did you ever think of going into writing novels, or are you always more interested in writing the nonfiction true crime?
A good question. I've never been tempted, and I think that's 20 years plus of daily journalism as a writer and editor. I'm a happy slave to the facts. And for me, researching and finding the kind of detail I put into my books, from the weather to the colors of things to what the long gone places look like, I'm really exacting. And I find the challenge for me is not to use my imagination to create a tableau or a scene or a conversation, but is to find the raw material I need to present truthfully, as best of my ability, what happened without embellishment. So I think like I said, I'm very happily in the groove of truth telling, if you will. And like I said, the challenge to me is to just dig into the research and find those nuggets of information that can really paint a vivid picture for readers.
Right. Well, I agree 100%. It's you do that, and you do paint a very detailed picture of what was going on, and that's just really wonderful. Now, back in the day, were there any true crime authors that you liked in particular? Did you pattern yourself after anybody? Were there books that you liked in particular in that genre?
Well, surprisingly, maybe a more history than true crime, since I straddle the. I mean, I think my books are true crime, but they're really history first, if you will. I don't. When as a journalist, I covered sort of a lifetime's full of contemporary true crime. But so Eric Larson, I'm a huge fan of his ability to build the worlds. David McCullough is a master of popular history. So they were great influences on me. But in the end, David Gran as a writer of both nonfiction and true crime. So I gravitate to people who largely were probably journalists, magazine writers, who were mastering long form and then moved into books and brought with it all that discipline of journalism, but also that narrative storytelling, that understanding that it's not enough just to present what happened, but you have to tell a story. And so those are my influences, some of my influences and my heroes. But I mean, I could go on: Debbie Applegate, Abbott Kaler, Deborah Blum. There's many writers, some of whom I've gotten to know over the years, and again, just love devouring their books.
Great. Well, now you're a professor. Now you now have graduated from college. You've gotten your journalism. And now you're teaching. Where are you teaching? Do you have a specialty, and how long have you been teaching?
I started teaching journalism part-time. This is a journalism school in Halifax at the University of King's College. So I ended up, after my daily journalism career, I ended up becoming a tenured faculty at the journalism school and taught there for about 15 years. And I had previously straddled both worlds, teaching part-time. And then our school, about a decade ago, founded this MFA in creative nonfiction program, which has recently expanded to a fiction stream. I joined that about 6-7 years ago. And so now I teach part-time in the MFA program, a cohort of about 35 students who take the 2-year program. And so I morphed from day-to-day journalism to teaching it, and as my interests and my publications veered towards books, I found a sort of a natural fit to teach nonfiction writing for authors.
Creative nonfiction. I've never heard that as the MFA. Is that are there a lot of those schools that teach that, or is it pretty much yours?
It may not always be called creative nonfiction. And, for viewers to make sure you understand, the creative part isn't embellishment. Creative part is storytelling. So it's adopting the kinds of things you'd see in a novel, like dialogue. You don't expect necessarily to see dialogue in a nonfiction book, but you can find verbatim dialogue. A cross-examination in a courtroom, the transcript of that is a dialogue. Some of the old newspaper accounts of some of the cases I deal with have Q&As. So or I could find a memoir where people recall their conversations. So there's an example of something you'd more expect to see in fiction, but you can truthfully use in nonfiction. And also the use of scene, building characters. Again, it's not making up people's thoughts. It's not embellishing scenes, but it's going with what you can prove, going with the detail you've got, but making the most of that. So my books don't start with the protagonist being born. They start with some crucial or important or intriguing scene that helps the reader understand and also become immersed in the bigger story. So that's creative nonfiction.
That's good. And you need that, because to sit there and just recite dates and things doesn't do anything, and so you got to be able to build a story. Very well. Very good. Well, now people will say, hey, Empire Deception, you're an overnight success. Nah, I think you had a few other books. How many books have you written, and what was your first book?
Well, a couple of them have already done, and that makes the count hard, but I think it's up to 9. And I started compiling some of these Nova Scotia historical true crime stories into anthologies. I guess it's not an anthology if you write it all, but to collections of stories. And I was also an investigative reporter. I investigated a major mine disaster here in the 90s and wrote a book on this Westray coal mine disaster. I also wrote a more of a pure history book about the early Acadian, French-speaking Acadian settlers of Nova Scotia who were en masse deported and expelled from Nova Scotia in the height of one of the mid 1700s wars. So I've bounced around, but mostly true crime has held my interest. And Empire of Deception, as you say, yes, was sort of because it was published in the States with an American publisher, Algonquin Books, who publish all my books now. It certainly gave me a lot more attention and a bigger audience.
Yeah. Well, now there was a change because, like you said, you were doing a lot of more regional stuff for up in Canada. And then here comes Empire Deception, and it's like a different type of writing. It seemed like the story got bigger almost. It began, they said Canada, America, even Dr. Cream. We got all sorts. You're all over. Was that a conscious decision you made to go in that direction as opposed to concentrating on the Algonquins and the Nova Scotia stories?
Well, Empire of Deception, just quickly, the précis is it's a Chicago swindler in the 1920s who convinces hundreds and hundreds of investors in Chicago, a lot of them his close friends, that he has oil wells in Panama. There was only a problem. He didn't have oil wells in Panama. There was no oil in Panama, but it was an exotic place. People had heard of it because the canal had just been completed. And my good fortune was when he was an early creator of the Ponzi scheme. In fact, out-Ponzi'd Charles Ponzi because he ran his scheme for 20 years. Ponzi just simply made it famous. When Leo Koritz, when his house of cards fell apart in 1923, he escaped and he turned up in Nova Scotia under an assumed name. So that's how I found this great Canada-U.S. cross-border story. Soon as I just happened to find a reference to it while researching other things in an archive. And I thought immediately, that's a good story. And I don't know if I recognized it was a book, but I kept researching it. I did a small story. I kept researching it. It became a passion project. And then ultimately, yes, was published in 2015. And it's just this great, and again, it does what I like my books to do. It's also against the tableau of the easy money, fast living, roaring 20s, when everything seemed possible, when, yeah, my good friend could give me an insider tip and I could make a mint off oil in Panama. So, and of course, it resonates today because when the book came out, it was billed as Leo Koritz, the Bernie Madoff of the 1920s, and he very much was. He was as long-lived and successful as Bernie Madoff, and he pulled his scheme for more than 10 years and various versions of it for almost 20.
It's something else. Now, Empire Deception has won a lot of awards. As a matter of fact, there's one publication that calls it one of the top 50 biographies of all time. Were you shocked at that acclamation, and did that put more pressure on you for future book?
Well, no, that was fairly recent. That was years, the Esquire accolade. No, it's just, it's so gratifying. But yes, totally surprising, given the number of biographies written. And we're talking about over centuries. So it was very gratifying. It was quite surprising. But it hasn't put pressure on me to think that every book has to be a home run like that. But it was very nice. And, the book was very well received. And it's not just awards, it's feedback, be it Goodreads, Amazon, or actual media reviews. Just finding that people got the book and liked it and recognized it was something fresh. And just to digress quickly, that's another thing I like. Nobody'd heard of Leo Koritz. In fact, I subsequently met people in Chicago as I was touring and doing events for the books. And people said, I've got a good friend. He's a total Chicago history nut, knows everything about Chicago. Never heard of this guy. So if I can get a historical scoop on the people of Chicago from up here in Nova Scotia, my job is done.
Well, that's good. Now Leo Koritz, what a guy. What made him such a captivating subject? I mean, it's a great story, but why did you then focus on Leo Koritz? What was did he have something with him?
So Leo is a lawyer. And what I found fascinating about him was he was kind of an ordinary guy who got in over his head. And from covering courts, I know sometimes lawyers, especially because they have access to trust accounts, can sometimes think, well, I'll dip into this and I'll make good. And Leo was classic that. He fell behind. He was dipping into client money. So he came up with an idea, well, I'll create a fake mortgage, do it as a loan to a client. I'll get that principal. I'll use that money for what I need now and to pay the interest as it came due. But of course, there was never enough money to cover the debt. So he'd fake another mortgage and another mortgage. And then he said, well, basically, I was starting to do them like they were streetcar transfers. I was doing so many. So he's starting to build this. Well, it's essentially a Ponzi scheme. You take in money and you promise other people you'll pay out profits or loan payment interest, and you can't cover it all. Well, then he found out about rice farms in Arkansas, went down there, started out as a legitimate business, and then he starts pyramiding these borrowing money against properties. He's selling shares in farms he doesn't own. He's got another Ponzi scheme. Nobody's calling it that, but it's this classic sort of unsustainable pyramid. And then literally, another thing that makes him fascinating is a friend of a friend tells him he's got timberland in Panama. Leo invests for a bunch of his friends, and it's a fraud. And Leo Koritz becomes interesting again and unique because he's probably one of the few fraudsters who was a victim of fraud himself and then took his inspiration. So then he started selling shares in timber in Panama. And then getting close to the 1920s, when he needed more money to keep it all afloat, he discovered oil. And that set off a huge boom, millions and millions of dollars. And he was promising and paying 60% interest a year. So it was just outlandish claims. And for a while, he sustained it. But then in 1923, he just ran out of steam and ran out of investors and ran out of money to keep churning over.
Well, that's really true. Now, I think his first con, if I remember the book correctly, was about a dog. Didn't he didn't he somehow become the trustee of a dog or something?
Maybe I shouldn't make him sound too much like an accidental crook, because you're right. One of his a story told about him around Chicago was that he liked to do wills for people, and there's always a little chance for abuse there, especially over a century. And one woman, a clause in her will that her money would go to keep her poodle in comfort after she was gone. And Leo was sort of the trustee executor. He was responsible for the poodle. And the story was that the poodle somehow, not very long after this, disappeared, and Leo got the balance of the money. So, story was told a couple of places, and knowing Leo, I think it's probably true.
Probably so. And then there are women. There are women on one side of Chicago, on the other side of Chicago. He's not exactly the most dapper-looking guy, but I tell you, the women were attracted to him. That's another fascinating story about this, isn't it? Is keeping of different women up in Chicago, I mean, even I think in New York.
He was quite a philanderer. You're right. I mean, he had a seemingly happy home life with 2 kids and his wife in suburban Evanston in a mansion there. But he had a South Side apartment with a mistress, and he specialized in schmoozing with the wives of his investors. And some of this was to help convince their husbands to invest. Some of it went over the line to extramarital affairs. And so when he disappears and there's a huge scandal breaks, and all of these reputable businessmen somehow have to explain how they could have been so hoodwinked. The other part of the story is women. I've got and you probably can't see it, but there's a True Detective cover from one of the magazines in the 30s, and it's got his name, Leo Kortz, and the headline is "Too Many Women." So it emphasized that as part of his downfall.
Wow. The other thing, he used negative psychology so well. Most people would go out soliciting. He didn't, and that was part of the con. He made people come to him and beg to be included in these things.
Well, that's why he's very Madoffian, if I can create a word. Bernie Madoff did the same thing. I mean, Bernie Madoff didn't have to go out there. Everyone was saying, you've got to invest with Madoff, and he could pick and choose. Leo, on a smaller scale, obviously, we're talking even billions of today's money, but tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. But Leo, he understood that negative psychology. If you make something hard to get, people will want it even more. And he had all sorts of, he would get checks from people and send them back. One fellow was so desperate to invest that Leo's law office had a transom window. It was open. And when he couldn't get Leo to open the door, he threw a satchel of money through the transom to him. And I mean, he realized that, and this was part of his whole scam, that he knew if he made the shares hard to get, people would be more desperate. There even became sort of an unofficial market. People were swapping the shares at premiums and higher costs between each other as people clamored to get them. And but most importantly for Leo, it meant he could be choosy, and he could be wary of someone who might ask too many questions or not be with the program. So there was he worked on a couple of levels that both promoted his scheme but also protected him from being exposed.
Well, things like I said, they then blew up. I mean, a huge thing. When he went to form the Bayano River Syndicate. Where is the Bayano, and what all were they involved? Was he telling them that they were involved in? They weren't, but he was telling people they were involved in everything in the world, it seemed like.
So the Bayano River is about 60 miles south of Panama City. So in those days, very remote, getting close to the Darien Peninsula of Panama, which is still almost impassable today. It's the Pan American Highway just barely sort of gets through it. So it was really a remote area. He didn't think he had to worry about too many people dropping in to take a look or really to know anything about it. So but then as time went on, the Panama Canal opens Panama. There's regular steamship service to the country. His investors are getting more and more lathered up, if you will, and excited because all along, see, they're getting their 60% a year profit. And like in the Madoff case, there's investors with Leo who made money because they quickly got their investment back and continued to make money. They were making other dupes money, of course. So finally in 1923, he couldn't put off a group of investors. First of all, he said, I want you fellows to be the top executives of the grandly named Baiano River Oil Syndicate. And one of these guys worked at a meatpacking firm. Another guy had been in distilling before the prohibition put him out of business. I mean, none of them had worked in the oil industry, but that didn't matter. They were all Leo's buddies. And he came up with a way to sort of get them off the scene. And incredibly, he sent them to Panama. They wanted to go tour the oil fields. So, and he toyed with them. And some of the lines he used, like, I'm really glad you're going. You'll be surprised. Well, they were surprised. So once he sends them off, they take a steamer out of New York, and it's going to be a few days to get to Panama. He cleans out bank accounts, takes whatever money he can from all around Chicago, and disappears. And so they start sending, and the telegrams were actually preserved in the press. More increasingly desperate telegrams. No sign of oil company. Is Leo there? We can't find anyone who knows him. No record. And anyway, after almost a week, they realized it took them that long. Leo was so convincing. It took them a week of futile search to finally realize they'd been had. And at that point, that's when it all breaks in the newspapers. Well, where's Leo? Leo's gone. And turns out he was coming here.
Yep, he's coming there. Now, when he's there, and he's not there that long, okay? Maybe a year, I think. I'm not sure, but...
Yeah, just under a year, yeah.
He's not trying to pull any swindles or cons up there, is he?
There was never any record of that. And they actually researched that, because he is eventually caught and then quite eager to go back to Chicago. So the worry here was, why is he so eager to get out of town? But there was no evidence. No, he had enough money stashed away that he brought with him. He bought a remote lodge and renovated into sort of this backwoods lakeside palace. He had elaborate parties there, whole new circle of Nova Scotia friends, and would go into the city, go into Halifax, which was quite a long drive and train ride at the time. But he'd go there for the hotels and the restaurants and to find more lady friends, and sort of picked up where he left off, except he passed himself off not as as sort of a retired rich investor, but as a literary genius, or a literary man who produced plays. But he couldn't stop the embellishment, and he let people know that he had discovered no less an author than Zane Grey, who was then one of the most best-selling American writers of the time, the writer of westerns, and made other outlandish claims. But he stopped swindling, but he never stopped lying.
That's true. That's very good. I'm not going to give away how they found out about him, because that's one of the great parts about this story, because that's what's fascinating. That it was one little slip up you never thought of, and that's how he got caught. He ends up going back to Chicago. What's Leo's fate? How does he end up back there?
Well, I don't want to give too much of that away either, but he does come back. And the reason he's desperate to get back to Chicago is not because he pulled cons in Nova Scotia, but because he was quite ill. He was ill with diabetes. Insulin was still an experimental drug. It was a death sentence. He had a very severe case. He had not looked after himself. And in fact, he enjoyed the high living as long as he could. And he came back to face the music. He also had to face his family. His family were heavy investors in Baiano and lost their savings. They were duped along with everyone else. So I guess the least he thought he could do was not prolong the agony, and he is sent to prison. And I'll just leave the tantalizing clue that he doesn't live that much longer. He doesn't serve that much longer in prison. And I'd like to say you got to read it to actually understand or appreciate the wildness of his final days.
What amazed me, and this is our last thing to chat about this book, the number of people who forgave him, the number of investors family members and investors who either forgave him or said, "I don't care about it. I don't want to put a claim against it." I was amazed at that they still liked him after all this time.
I'm not sure how much maybe some of them liked him, but you're right that there are hundreds and hundreds of investors actually came forward and filed claims with the bankruptcy court as it went through whatever assets Leo had left behind. And this was all happening while he was on the lam. But a lot of people never came forward, and that's pretty clear. And partly because the newspapers were just pillorying and slagging everyone who'd been foolish enough to invest. I mean, one newspaper commentator said a simple phone call to anyone in the oil industry would have elicited the response, "There is no oil in Panama." But the hold Leo had, and that's again so fascinating because it's a timeless story in the sense that con men can still get followers. Con men can still get believers. And once the belief sinks in, it's like nothing can shake it. And Leo's an example of that. So his success has so much to say about our own gullibility and our own foibles. And so it's you can feel sorry on one level for some of these investors for being so foolish. But but for the grace of God has to come into it as well. You know how gullible we all can be in the right circumstances.
That's right. Well, now we move from that story to The Murderous Dr. Cream, your next major hit, and this is another wow. Where did you find out about Dr. Cream, and who is he?
Well, Dr. Cream is a Canadian doctor from the 18th. He went to medical school in the 1870s and immediately started to kill people. He killed his new bride. It was his first victim in Canada. He set up a medical practice in London, Ontario, killed a patient. And a lot of the patients he started killing were women desperate for abortions. They were pregnant. They weren't married at a time when this was like a social death sentence to have a child out of wedlock. And they were desperate for him to help. And he started choosing some to actually kill with poison. And when things got hot in Canada after a second murder, he went to Chicago. He killed 3 women in Chicago and a man near Chicago, and actually went to prison for 10 years for that final murder of a man. And when he was released, went to London, England, and started poisoning women there. So in all, at least 10 women killed. How did I find out about him? Despite the death toll, and despite the fact he was operating right around the time of Jack the Ripper, Cream had been forgotten. I do a lot of reading, not just for potential books or research for books, but I also write a lot of true crime stories. I do a column for Ellery Queen's mystery magazine of true crime. So how did I find Cream? It's almost like, how did nobody remember this fellow for me? Because I'm seeing references to him in the papers. I'm seeing him in anthologies. And I realized there's only been one really good book, a scholarly book written about him 35 years ago. And I thought, wait a minute, I think there's more to tell here. And in reading that book, I saw a lot of court records that I knew would be out there, inquest records. I thought, as well as researched as this is, I can do better. And this is a great story. And Algonquin were keen, and that's where it came from. So I suppose I should say I run with a bad crowd, because people like Cream seem to be around me. But I think, in some ways these stories find me, but I think it's also seeing the potential. And I just thought, well, this is another great Canadian story that resonates elsewhere, that involves three countries. But beyond that, I didn't want to just tell the story of Dr. Cream, which is really a series of murders. I wanted to know answer some fundamental questions. How did he get away with this for so long? What was the state of policing and forensics that allowed that? And where were the failings? Where were the mistakes? And why was he seemingly allowed to kill with impunity? There were times when he was a chief suspect. I mean, his patients were dying. And another factor I found was, well, the privilege he had as a doctor, the trust he was afforded as a professional meant that he could weasel out of being a suspect or move on to the next town. And all of that I found fascinating. So the subtitle is The Hunt for a Victorian Era Serial Killer, because I wanted to emphasize that. And the ultimate hunt that brings him to justice is Scotland Yard for his final London murders. And I knew there'd be a huge file on that. And that allowed me to really reconstruct this story as not just a true crime murder story, but also a detective story.
What you said earlier in this podcast, you mentioned that you begin your books with a scene, not with birds or anything like that. This book begins actually, I think he's in prison or being released from prison in Illinois.
That's right.
But was he released early in Illinois? Didn't there some family was able to get him out of prison early from the murders?
Well, it's a little murky, but I think I've found, and in all of his story, there's some layers of myth. I like to go back to the original sources, and I was able to clear up some myths. But it's pretty clear he had some family support. His father was a very wealthy timber merchant in Canada. He didn't leave Cream any money in his will because he'd already put up a lot of thousands and thousands of dollars for Cream's defense while his father was still alive. And it kind of written him off, but he had allowed the trustees to give him more money. And it's pretty clear that some of that money was used to help lobby for Cream to get a pardon and early release. Cream was supposed to serve life in prison. It's hard to see any evidence of a direct bribe, but certain politicians that opposed his release suddenly supported his release. And it did bring some big players in. And all of these people had serious or should have had serious questions to answer when, within months of being released, Cream goes back and starts killing again. But it's interesting you'd point out, Plain, about that start. I have to credit my editor, Amy Gash in Algonquin. I had started with a murder, which I thought was probably a way to start a murder, but a story about a serial killer. But she really, and she always does this, she always challenges me to think outside the box. Is there a different way to start it? And together we came up with this brilliant idea of, you see this guy coming out of prison in 1891. You know he's been in for murder. And who is this mysterious guy? How did he get out? And then you drop the shoe. He'd already committed 6 murders before that nobody knew about. He was destined to go to London and commit more. So again, thinking of a way of introducing the time, introducing the character, introducing some drama, and then, leaving the reader to go, well, who is this guy? And how did he get away with it? That fundamental question I want the readers to follow is this tale of not just macabre murders. And I didn't want to soft pedal that, because this guy was a cruel poisoner, preyed on people's trust, and they died in horrible ways from strychnine poisoning that he put in medicine that they thought was beneficial or was going to help them. So he betrayed their fundamental trust. But I wanted people to see the reality, but I also wanted them to be cheering as Scotland Yard tracks him down.
Got closer and closer. The rope and the noose got tighter around this guy. They were closing in on him, And but what was it? What was it? His idea to go to England, or was it his family's idea to send him to England just to get him out of Canada?
Both, I think. He knew England, and he gravitated to an area called Lambeth, which is directly across from the Palace of Westminster, the British Parliament, Big Ben. It's right across the river, and because there's a big hospital there called St. Thomas, it's still there. He had actually done some postgraduate work at St. Thomas's. He was trying to get certification in England. He failed at that, but he went to Edinburgh, Scotland, and became certified there as a doctor, which was an extra license. And he used this to promote himself because it was quite a distinguished accolade or license. I mean, he was no slouch. I mean, he was a smart guy, but he had this cruel, pathological, almost mad streak and this lust to kill. So he knew London, and his family did have him home in Quebec City, where he had grown up for a while. He stayed with his brother, and he was just too unstable. Both mentally, I think he was unstable anyway, but also the ordeal of over 10 years in Joliet prison, which was a horrible experience. They either he said he'd go to England or they suggested it, but they sent him to England. They thought a change would do him good, and all it did is unleash him on this area that he lived in called Lambeth, and it was kind of like Whitechapel. This is only a few years after Jack the Ripper, and Lambeth is another downtrodden area. He starts frequenting the sex workers of Lambeth, and these become his victims, and ultimately he becomes known as the Lambeth Poisoner. So he even gets a Jack the Ripper type name, and ultimately kills another 4 women before Scotland Yard. And this was fascinating. The idea that even after Jack the Ripper, the idea of the serial killer was so novel that it took Scotland Yard months to really piece together. And some of it were mistakes. One of Cream's victims was thought to be a death by natural causes. It took a while for them to start understanding that, wait a minute, 2 here, 1 here, another one there, and they thought there was a 5th because it was an attempted murder. So it was just fascinating to have the files, reports, the aha moments right there in the original records as the detectives finally figured out, wait a minute, and this, not only are these connected, this shady Canadian doctor knows way too much about these murders. And it's ultimately some things Cream does. Letters he writes, attempts to blackmail people for his murders. I mean, there's so many layers to this, but this contributes to him becoming the prime suspect.
Well, he has become so infamous, or was so infamous, he ended up in Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. How long was he in the wax museum?
Oh, apparently. And again, this is amazing and people don't know him. He was there, among other famous British poisoners and killers until the 1960s. What happened to him, I don't know. Hopefully he was melted down and used for something useful like candles. But yes, and a likeness of him was in Madame Tussauds very soon after he was convicted. So, I mean, in his day, I mean, he was one of the most notorious killers of the Victorian era, and up there with the bigs like Crippen and the Palmer, the another poisoner, and he probably was standing alongside them in wax effigy, and no less a person than George Orwell writing about the allure of British murder. He lumped Cream in with a bunch of others, some of the people I've mentioned, as murderers who would always be infamous just for their last names. So it's kind of ironic that decades later, when I come along to sort of resurrect him, he had been thoroughly forgotten. But again, just such a great window, this story is such a great window into the story in Victorian times, the attitudes, the denigration of women, the hypocrisy of Victorian gentlemen who would live life on the wild side while having to be respectable in daytime. I mean, I make the analogy that I mean, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the famous Robert Louis Stevenson novel, captured that. And Cream was really living that, because for a long time, he seemed like a respectable doctor. But here he was with this murderous Hyde personality.
It was a fascinating read, wonderful read. I enjoyed that book too. Now, that leads me to something's coming out this summer, if I'm not mistaken. You have another book coming out. Can you just give us a sneak preview of your newest book, please?
So, yes, my newest book is coming out June 25th in the United States from Algonquin. It's also published in Canada in June. It's called A Gentleman and a Thief, the daring jewel heists of a jazz age rogue. And it's about another fellow you've never heard of called Arthur Berry. And I discovered his story just on Google, looking for interesting stories. I think I was looking for con men at the 20s, the jazz age. And I found a Life magazine profile in the 1950s. It called Arthur Berry the greatest jewel thief who ever lived. And I thought, got to find out more about this fellow. And there was a book done in the 60s, sort of as told to book, not really ghosted, but he cooperated with an author. And it was a great starting point. But I thought, what a great story, because again, it captures jazz age excess. It's a larger than life character. And he's kind of like Leo Kortz in the way that, as bad as he is, I mean, this guy, Arthur Berry, is stealing jewels, but he's robbing the rich. And Leo's robbing people who should have known better. Arthur Berry's robbing people that aren't, they don't need these jewels to survive. I mean, this is a status symbol, right? But he even had a line, if a woman can wear a $750,000 string of pearls, she doesn't have to worry where her next dinner's coming from. And that's it exactly. So he's like a Robin Hood who didn't give to the poor. He just gave to himself. But he preyed on the rich, and he was so good at it. And I call him a gentleman thief because one of his methods was he would dress in a tux, crash some garden party or party at some Long Island mansion of some millionaire or some Wall Street trader or someone like a Vanderbilt or a Rockefeller, and just circulate, put on a posh accent. And what he's really doing is casing the house, wandering upstairs, checking the bedroom, seeing where the jewels are likely to be so he can make a nighttime visit. That's one of his methods. He graduated to not just breaking in at night when nobody would be home, so he didn't disturb anyone, or at supper time. He actually graduated into breaking into people's homes, and then as an accomplice rifled for the jewels, he'd sit on the bed and calm the couple down, chatting about, how did you enjoy the opera tonight? Don't worry, we're only here for the jewels. So he had this charm that was just amazing. And in fact, one of his victims that he had held in their bedroom while they rifled it for jewels, the woman said to reporters later, I know he's terrible, but isn't he charming?
Well, I think that whets our appetite. Yeah. And we can pre-order that now.
That's right. It's everywhere online. You can check my website, deanjobb.com. Lots of information and links there. But it's coming out from Algonquin Books, June 25th.
Good. Now, one last thing. As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about the movie The Grand Hotel. Do you ever see that movie with Greta Garbo, John Barrymore, Lionel Barrymore? He was sort of a cat burglar too after Jewel, and was so smooth and so charming. It's got me thinking about that.
But I've heard the name of that, but you're right in that that Barry gets called the American Raffles because earlier on at the turn of the century, early 20th century, Raffles was a series of stories about a kind-hearted jewel thief, and who was gentlemanly, but supported himself by stealing jewels. So it was a natural fit. But if you think of Cary Grant in To Catch a Thief, his character, you think of the Netflix series Lupin, about the sort of the kind-hearted, again, the good guy jewel thief that you root for. He's a lot like that. So just to be a polite thief. I also compare him to Butch Cassidy. If anyone's seen Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, apologizing, sorry, but we're just here for the jewels. And that was his attitude.
Very good. Very good. Now, Are you already researching the next book?
I am actually. Um, One thing that happens when you're doing deep research on a book, it's hard not to look at the column, what's in the newspaper, the column beside, or on another page you skipped by. But I did find a great unsolved New York murder from 1920. Um, it's a go. I'm still waiting to sort of to have it confirmed and announced. But yes, I'm also working on that, and I'm hopefully within a week or two I'll be able to put a page up. Got the page ready to go to announce it. But again, true crime. But this one's a little different because it's an unsolved murder. And I've set myself the challenge of trying to solve it, and I think I can.
Wow, that's great. Well, you had the books. You write a column for Ellery Queen magazine. You're all over Twitter. I mean, you find things. You're doing something for another website, aren't you? There, are you writing for another website there?
Well, at Ellery Queen, I do both sort of a hybrid, one month online, 1 month off. Crime reads. I do a lot for crime reads, which is a wonderful resource, the fiction and nonfiction. So I do quite a bit of writing for them, and I review a lot of true crime for Irish Times, Washington Independent Review of Books, and other websites.
A busy man. A busy man. But thank goodness, I'll tell you why. You have, before we started, you saw my wife. She popped on and said, "Empire Deception's her favorite book." I'll tell you why. She loved that book. And friends, if you read it, you will be hooked on the work of Dean Jobb, because he's a wonderful writer, a wonderful individual. And I want to say, Dean, thank you so much for being with us today here on Books and Looks.
Look, thank you, Blaine, for having me. It's been a great chat.
Great. Friends, we'll be right back. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, friends. I'm telling you what, he is an interesting guy. His books are fantastic, and you really want to try to get them and read them, because they're just a wonderful look into the true crime genre, and he does it so well. Now, what am I looking at? You know what? I just got to go back. You remember a couple of weeks ago, friends, we had Otho Eskin on, and Otho talked about deep sea mining. Yeah, mining for minerals. Well, I just want you to know that this past week, Norway just passed a bill allowing drilling. That's right, deep sea mining up in the Arctic. Yeah, they're going to do it up in the Arctic. If you can believe that. Norway has allowed this. The EU is going wild, but Norway's not part of the EU. They don't care what the EU says. No. And why did they do this? They said they're tired of Russia and China monopolizing rare earth minerals and controlling the market. You know what? There's a lot of money to be made in deep sea mining, but I worry about the pollution. I'm looking at that. I hope you're looking at that too. And I really, really learned a lot this week in a little magazine I get now and then. And that's a great magazine. And this showed me what's going on up in Norway. I shake my head at this. I shake my head. Anyway, on behalf of viewsonbooks.com, on behalf of my good friends at Podcast Studio X, this is Blaine DeSantis for Books and Looks, saying may all your leaves be painted in a book.